Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this special webinar to discuss Mayo Farmers Month and a focus on heart disease in the farming community. My name is Neil Johnson, and I'm the host for this evening's event, which is a collaboration between Croí, the Heart and Stroke charity, Healthy Ireland, Teagasc, and Pobble. And I want to say special thanks to Lawrence Gahan, HSE West, who's been very much the driving force behind this event this evening, and indeed the whole Mayo Farmers Month. The whole purpose of the Mayo Farmers Month initiative is really to invite the farming community in Mayo to make heart-healthy changes during this month. And that's because a recent survey has revealed that Irish farmers are at an increased risk of heart disease and stroke. Almost 50% of Irish farmers have high cholesterol and high blood pressure, and 86% of Irish farmers are overweight or are living with obesity. This is a cause according to recent research, and all of these, of course, are very important risk factors for heart disease. Can I say at the outset that this evening's discussion or webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Croí website in a matter of hours after the session closes. And for anybody who is following us on social media, the Twitter handle, the hashtag Mayo Farmers Month, would encourage you to engage in the discussion. And as part of Farmers Month, Croí is offering 15 Mayo farmers a place on a special lifestyle change program. And this is a 6-week online program to help you reduce your risk of heart disease and stroke. And at the end of this evening's webinar, we'll be sending a survey to all of you who have joined us this evening. And you have the option in that survey to opt in to be considered for part of this program. And if you or a family member, or a spouse is a farmer, you can nominate yourself or nominate somebody you think would benefit from this intervention. So this evening, we're taking the format of, I suppose, a casual conversation. And we have a great lineup of speakers, all of whom are experts in their own field. And we're focusing on a discussion on heart-healthy lifestyle and tips for living a healthy lifestyle. And we'll have time at the end of our discussion to address questions you might have. And I would encourage any of you, if you have questions, to use the question and answer function. Just type them in and we'll try and pick them up and try and get to as many of them as we possibly can. And already the questions are streaming in. So there's lots, I hope, of useful tips to be exchanged here this evening. And I also want to say that as part of this evening's event, we're going to select one lucky person from those of you who've joined us this evening to receive a limited edition signed Croí Mayo GAA jersey. Now this special jersey was created for Mayo's match against Kerry in March 2020. And that was the last time that we were able to attend the match before the restrictions. So not only is the jersey a special commemorative jersey, it was actually launched to launch the Croí Third Age project, which again was a collaboration between Croí, the Heart and Stroke charity, the HSE and Mayo County Council. And I want to say special thanks to Intersport Elveries and Mayo GAA for creating that special one-off jersey. And the winner will be selected after the Q&A session this evening. And it'll be a random draw. One of my colleagues will just pick a number, we'll announce it. And whichever one of you is fortunate to have won this jersey, just stay on the line as we close down when we get your details and arrange to get it to you. So I'm going to now introduce you to our expert speakers this evening. And the first person I'd like to introduce to you is a colleague of mine at here in Galway, and that's Dr. Jenni Jones. Jenni is a physiotherapist by background and is a senior lecturer at the School of Medicine at NUI Galway. And she's going to share her tips on how to increase physical activity and the importance of getting active in our daily lives. Jenni, you're very welcome and good to have you with us. My second panelist this evening, again, a colleague of mine, coming to us this evening from Lewisburg, where she's living, and that's Zoe Mccrotten. And Zoe is the Croí cardiovascular nurse specialist working with us at the Croí Heart and Stroke Centre in Galway. And she's going to share insights into the risk factors for heart disease and stroke and what we can do to reduce these. Hi, Zoe, you're receiving us okay there in Lewisburg, are you? That's good. You might unmute so that we
will, yeah. I'm all good in Lewisburg.
Good stuff. And our third panelist this evening, another colleague of mine, this time a dietitian, Croí dietitian, Aisling Harris. And Aisling is going to share her tips with us around maintaining a healthy diet and how diet plays a vital role in managing risk factors for heart disease, not least among those cholesterol and high blood pressure. Hi, Aisling, welcome.
Yeah.
And finally, to those on the line, most of you, everybody you're seeing on your screen right now is probably new to you, but our next panelist it should be no stranger to those of you in Mayo. Again, he's from Lewisburg, and he's a former Mayo footballer, and I believe he featured very much between 03 and 11, so a good long history playing with Mayo. He grew up on a farm in West Mayo. I'm speaking, of course, of our special guest this evening, Austin O'Malley. And Austin attributes much of his success to date to the character-shaping experience that is being brought up on a farm in the west of Ireland. And he appreciates at first hand the diverse challenges posed by that particular way of life. Austin is now a performance coach, founder of Hexagon Performance, and should any of you wish to reach Austin through his company, you'll get him Austin at hexagonperformance.ie. He is an evidence-based practitioner, highly regarded in the area of health and well-being and maximizing one's potential. So, Austin, you're very welcome. Delighted to have you with us.
Good evening, guys. Great to be here. And thank you for the opportunity. Looking forward to it.
And as I said to you, we're going to take the format of a conversation. I'll ask you some sort of leading questions, if you will. And hopefully, as we have our conversation, we're going to share information that's going to be useful to those that are listening to us this evening. So I'm going to start by going back to what I said at the outset. And that is, I made the statement that Irish farmers are at an increased risk of heart disease and stroke. And if I start maybe with you, Jenni, there's some research now, which seems a bit odd actually, that farmers who we imagine as living a very physical lifestyle are actually sitting more than 8 hours a day. Hard to believe, but maybe it's the changing way in which farming is being delivered. What are the implications of that from an exercise, physical activity point of view, and how does that impact on our cardiovascular health?
Okay, thank you, Neil. It is a very important consideration in terms of how much you sit. So we're seeing a new science around sitting being an actual risk factor in itself. So even if you're actually quite active during parts of the day, if you spend prolonged periods sitting down, we see that that has a very negative effect on blood pressure, on cholesterol, on blood glucose, which links to diabetes, for example, on your weight and your body shape. And farming has changed, like many industries actually. It's changed to have more machinery, there's more technology, and people are sitting a lot more. And there's probably a lot more paperwork as well now related. I work in education, paperwork is growing and growing, and I think similarly we're in an era of much paperwork and much sitting down. And the interesting, I suppose, science fact is that we see that when people sit for more than 7.5 hours a day, we see some really, really concerning findings. And we, on a positive note, see that when people just reduce that even a little bit, so they don't sit for more than an hour, or ideally less than sort of half an hour, even if you only get up momentarily, but you reduce this prolonged sitting, there are massive, massive benefits. And so that's a very tangible thing that I think it's really good to be aware of. It's not just about being active, it's also about not sitting for long periods of time.
And actually, we all know that smoking is a clearly detrimental risk factor for heart disease. And I read something recently which said that sitting is the new smoking.
Absolutely. And I think that it's a really important take-home message. So people, for example, who are achieving the physical activity guidelines, so they're achieving the recommendations are this 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity, which I'm sure we'll talk more about in the session. But people who are doing that, but then they're spending this prolonged period of time sitting the rest of the time, and when it crosses that line of 7.5 hours, you see it almost cancels out all that good work of the exercise, if that makes sense. And that's where the sort of sitting is the new smoking, that it's cancelling out lots of benefits. So a really important take-home message for this evening.
Yeah, we will be talking a lot about exercise, and I know Austin will have something to add to that discussion as well. You mentioned risk factors, and that's probably a nice lead in to Zoe, who's our nurse. And Zoe, at the outset, I again refer to research which suggests that almost half of all farmers have high cholesterol and high blood pressure. Now, high cholesterol and high blood pressure are what we call risk factors. Can you tell us more about what do we mean by a risk factor? What are the risk factors, and can we do anything about them?
Yeah, so I suppose first of all is what they're risk factors for. So we're talking about risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And cardiovascular disease is a disease of the circulatory system. So it could be affecting your coronary arteries, so that supply the heart. It could be stroke, which is the supply to the brain. And you can also get peripheral vascular disease. So that's the supply in your legs. So when we're talking about risk factors for we're talking about risk factors for cardiovascular disease particularly. And there's two types of risk factors as well, which we'll probably cover in a lot more detail throughout the session. So, and it's important to know that there's those that you can change and those that you can't. So as Jenni mentioned there, one of the biggest ones is being physically inactive. There's also cholesterol, blood pressure, and when I say blood pressure, I mean high blood pressure, alcohol, being overweight or obese. Obesity is now classed as a chronic disease. The smoking, I think that's, I said them all. So they would be the biggest ones, and we'll talk about each of these. Oh, and diabetes as well, they tend to go hand in hand. And we'll talk about each of these in more detail because, you know, on their own, they're all huge risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And interestingly, a study that Chagas published last year in 2020 was that 74% of farmers have 4 or more of those risk factors, which is huge, you know, and it's kind of like the more risk factors you have, the higher your chance of having an event. So, you know, that's kind of a 1 in 3 chance if you have 4 risk factors, you know, 75% chance of having developing heart disease from that. So that's quite significant.
So we might just spend a minute on the risk factors, because you've listed out things there: blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, stress, smoking, physically inactive, alcohol, being overweight and obese. And then, of course, there's genetics, family history, gender, and age. And all of those you're calling them risk factors. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that if you have one of these that you're going to have a heart attack or a stroke. Can you talk to us a little bit about how this comes together, or what do we need to know?
Okay, so I mentioned there, and you just covered them there, they're the risk factors you can change, and they're important because 80% of cardiovascular disease is preventable, but there are also those that you can't change. So for example, race, we know that there's certain ethnic groups that are more prone to certain conditions. So for example, Afro-Caribbean population tend to be more prone to high blood pressure. People from South Asia can be more prone to high cholesterol, and that's in their genes. They can't change that, but it's important to be aware of it. The same as sex. Like it used traditionally, we used to think of heart disease as being an older men's disease, maybe, but we know that's not true. Now maybe men have heart attacks initially slightly younger than women, but the reason for this, we know now, is due to hormones. So women get cardiovascular protection from their hormones, from estrogen. So that's why maybe initially men may be younger when they have heart attack, but that balances out, and actually it's fairly even kind of when that catches up. Family history. So if you have a family history of heart disease, particularly premature heart disease, you're 50% more likely to develop it yourself. That's a huge risk factor. So again, you can't change your family's genetics, their genes, but being aware of it, can really help you to focus on those risk factors that we can change, that we can take ownership of. And then finally, the fourth one would be age. So the same as with the car, as we get older, we don't work as well. Things aren't quite as good as they used to be. And so therefore, kind of our risk does go up as we get older.
Yeah, I think an important message from what you've just said there, and you mentioned sex, and of course you weren't talking about frequency, you were talking about gender. And I think the thing is that we do think of heart attack as a man's disease, an older man's disease. But as you rightly say, women, particularly postmenopausal women, are at a higher risk than men of a similar age. And actually more women die from heart disease than they do from breast cancer, yet we don't seem to have that awareness. So I think that's an important message for any female listeners this evening, that you need to be as concerned about your cardiovascular health as men. And I'm just going to, before I move on from you, Zoe, because there was some questions had come in earlier, and one had come in which it basically said, my mother has heart disease, can I get it? And when I read that, first of all, I was like, it's not contagious, but I suppose the point here is the genetic piece. To reassure somebody who says that to you, listen, my mother has heart disease, am I going to have heart disease? How would you answer that?
So it doesn't always fit that you'll get it. Like I said, it's not contagious, but being aware of it means you can focus on the things that you can change, particularly kind of in women. If in the female line, say that if the mother is under the age of 65 when she has heart disease or has a heart condition, so has a heart attack or angina, then there is a bigger risk, because that's considered premature heart disease. If it's older, then it's likely due to lifestyle. So if they're over the age of 75, then it's likely to be to do with the lifestyle that the mum's led. So it's really focusing on the things that you can change and being aware as if it is truly a genetic, a family history, or is it linked with lifestyle? Because often as well is we pick up things things tend to be in families, so we all eat the same meals, we all do the same amount of exercise, stresses can be similar. So it can be linked that way as well. And I'm sure like Ashley and Jenny and Austin may kind of comment on that kind of as we go on, but there's a lot of links there as well.
Yeah, I suppose we want to have a positive message here this evening as well. We've talking about risk factors. You have these risk factors. The good news is that the vast majority of these can be modified, changed, and we can reduce our risk of having a cardiac event. Austin, if I can go to you next, and in the introduction, we talked about the space you operate in really is that sort of body-mind relationship, and I think now more than ever, as we live through COVID, the consequences of what COVID is doing to us mentally are enormous. Do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, obviously there's huge challenges out there at the moment, and they're quite impactful on our mental health. So I suppose the area that I would execute across will be the kind of most performance crucibles. But a key constituent in that, in anybody's performance or their health and well-being, is their mindset, and being able to manage their mindset, and being aware, I suppose, of your daily thought process, which is so important. And I think just right now at the moment, we have an awful lot of external stuff going on, and there's an awful lot of what I would class poor information coming to us in terms that we're taking in, and that we're almost buried in this kind of avalanche of COVID data and that can be quite impactful, and it can be, you know, quite stressful in that. So the key thing that I would say to a lot of people out there at the moment is just to, you know, that idea of reflect, you know, sitting down and reflecting and taking a moment to pause and to monitor your thought process at the moment, and ask yourself, what is the quality of, you know, the daily information and the daily feed that you're taking in, because it has a huge impact on your mental health as well. So it's about, I suppose, you know, listening to the girls there, and even looking back at those risk factors and a lot of them can be associated back to poor behaviors and habits, and that's all obviously stems back to you know, your mindset around maybe your health and well-being. So it's a great opportunity now, even though there's a huge amount of challenges out there, it might be a great opportunity to take some time to pause and reflect and monitor your habits and behaviors. There's an old quote that often comes to mind when I'm thinking about habits and behaviors, but it's like, habits rule the unreflecting flock. So we are, by virtue, you know, a collection of what we do daily in terms of our habits, but sometimes we're not aware of those, and we're not aware that that they could be quite negative, and they may be actually taken away from a really positive mindset and so on. So it's just that idea of maybe operating of what we often sometimes call like a growth mindset, whereby you're sitting down, you're being a little bit more conscious, and you're creating awareness. I believe awareness is key. If you can create more awareness in your life, you'll be able to challenge your thought process and challenge your habits and behaviors a little bit more. So if we can build a little bit more awareness into our day and be more aware of our thought process around our health and well-being, and it's a really interesting exercise sometimes if you just take an old-fashioned pen and paper and journal a little bit at the end of the day, and question yourself around the habits, around your nutrition, around your exercise, maybe around your sleep, in your rest and recovery. It's amazing what it'll throw up, and that you'll be able to challenge it. So those are just, again, some little quick takeaways that perhaps that could be helpful to people with regard to building a really positive growth mindset.
Yeah, and I want to just pick up on sort of two things that you alluded to there. First of all, this negativity that's we're bombarded, certainly in the media, every single day. It's just how many are dying, you know, how many have died, how many are in hospital. Like, that can't be good for us. And so what practical sort of advice would you give to?
Yeah, look, it's hugely impacting. And again, we have to be, you know, aware of I keep going back to that idea, the quality of your information feed, you know, it feeds into the quality of your thought. You know, a lot of people have got on a cycle and they've developed a habit. And I was there myself at the early stages of COVID, where you were checking statistics daily. And you know, you were kind of amassed in this, as I said, an avalanche of COVID data. But maybe to develop a little strategy for yourself, where that you only check statistics maybe at the end of the week and see where you are in terms of that, or you listen to one news caption a day, rather than getting it at 9, getting it at 12, getting it at 6 and 9 again. That's a lot of negative information coming in, seeping into your subconscious, and that drives and accelerates, you know, anxiety. You know, we know the physiological effects then that comes with that, in terms of the elevation of cortisol in your system, which is a direct relationship with cardiovascular disease as well, and how corrosive that is on the system. So to be very aware of that, again, we've begun to develop habits of you know, just switching on, because as you said, it's almost 360. It's on the newspaper, it's the radio, it's the TV. So to just be a little bit more mindful around that in terms of what you're taking in.
Yeah, I think you've made some really good points there, and I think I want to sort of almost reiterate what you're saying there, because it's very important. I mean, what I heard from you there is take time out from this. I mean, I know myself, I tend to listen to the radio first thing in the morning. I tend to try and catch the 9 o'clock news. I might get, you know, 1 or 2 news bulletins during the day, and it's the same thing, and it's very, very anxiety provoking. So your practical tip is cut it out. It's just listen to it once a day or
absolutely.
whatever, you know.
Be more strategic with it, and realize at the moment that there's an awful lot of good stuff going on out there in the world, and that to maybe go and seek that, you know. So for every one negative news story, try and feed yourself with 2 or 3 really, really positive ones, to keep a balance.
Yeah, and I think the other point you make there is important in terms of explaining something to people. If we're bombarded with news and information that's creating anxiety, as you rightly pointed out, that actually affects our body. It releases, as you said, chemicals that are damaging, and we know that is the link between stress, anxiety, and heart disease. So very, very important points there. I just want to go to one other thing you said. You mentioned, rest and sleep. And we know from research that sleep, both in terms of quality and quantity, is hugely important, not just for cardiovascular health, but for all aspects of health. Any thoughts on from your point of view, how we ensure we get quality sleep?
Yeah, well, sleep for me, and even like across, I suppose, the area that I work in predominantly, a lot around sports and work on athletes, like we would term sleep as it's really the silver bullet of high performance. It's like it's the only period during during your cycle that you get to actually fully regenerate your body at a deep cellular level. So the quality of your sleep is number one that we must look at. The quantity, again, that we're trying to get that magic 8 hours or so on, or in some cases, younger people may need even more. But there are a number of tips around getting really quality sleep. And I think the one that I always look at is that pre-bedtime routine. Doing simple things that you're given subliminal or subconscious prompts to your body that you're actually coming down into a state of rest and digest before you go to bed. What we've began to see lately, and particularly with the increase in use in technology, is that a lot of us are interacting with screens right up to the point that we actually put our head on the pillow. And we've known that blue light that's emitting off screens, that it's lighting up the back of the brain, which keeps us very, very active. And it takes, if you can visualize it, that being lit up, that it takes a while for that to cool down. And often, we get caught into highly emotional conversations, maybe pre-bedtime as well. It could be with a partner, it could be with a spouse or so on. So to try and clear the path and almost have what we call a technological sundown, maybe for 2 hours before you go to bed, stay away from highly emotive conversations. Another one that's frequent, a lot of people might bring a glass of water to bed. And we've often found that it's kind of giving you a subconscious plant to your body to wake up and have a sip in the middle of the night, which creates broken sleep. Or people may drink quite a lot of fluids late in the evening, and it upsets their circadian rhythm in terms of that they wake to flush their bladder and have to go. So there's a load of little different strategies, and we would call them quick wins around building really, really good sleep. Another one really is your sleep environment, making sure that it's comfortable, that it's cool, that it's dark, and that it's pleasant. And there's an old adage around sleep in your bedroom, even, that the 3 S's, that it should be kept for only when you're sick, for sleep, and for sex. And everything else outside of that should be outside of your bedroom. So even reading and all of that, it's just that to create a space, that it's a space for rest, as opposed to mixing up the signaling in your brain that we're coming here to work as well.
Yeah, well, we're going to keep away from the sex topic now,
Yeah.
Austin. So that'll move me straight on. No, very on a serious note, really, really good practical tips there. And I was speaking to a doctor recently, and he was telling me that now almost his instinctive question when he meets somebody is, how are you sleeping? Because we know so much about the value of sleep. Aisling, if I can move to you. Another statistic, it's all statistics this evening. A statistic suggests that 86% of farmers are overweight or obese. Again, it doesn't sort of sit well, the concept that farmers, who we imagine to be, constantly out there in a very physical, demanding lifestyle, being overweight and obese. What's your take on this? And more importantly, so what? What difference does it make to cardiovascular health?
So yeah, we know that 86% of farmers are overweight or obese, which is much higher than the general population. So being overweight or obese, especially if we store it around our middle. So if you're more of an apple shape, so you store it around your waist rather than your hips, we know that fat isn't just sitting there, it's close to our organs, and it's constantly producing these chemicals and hormones. So it can, as well as putting pressure on our organs, it can affect our blood pressure, our cholesterol, our risk of diabetes. So for men, ideally, your waist measurement should be less than 37 inches. And for women, it should be less than 32. And, we don't need to have huge weight loss to see reductions in blood pressure, cholesterol, and your blood sugar levels if you're diabetic. You only need to go for about 5 to 10%. So if you're, say, 100 kilos or 15 stone, that would be about 5 kilos or 11 pounds. So you'll start to see benefits with that amount of weight loss. It doesn't have to be these huge targets. The smarter the goal, so specific small goals that you can achieve, you know, for a long time are much better than these crash diets where you might lose a lot of weight and then maybe regain it. So yeah, weight will, you know, it's one of those risk factors that we talked about, and it's one that, you know, it's a difficult one to change, but it can be, you know, you can have huge benefit when you do have that small bit of weight loss.
Yeah, now you mentioned fat, and of course, traditionally, I suppose, people have the sort of stereotypical notion of the farming diet is, you know, the big healthy or the big unhealthy breakfast, the fry up and so forth. And there's a lot of talk about fat and the types of fat and how it affects cholesterol. So maybe if we start by, in simple terms, tell us, like, you hear about good fats, bad fats. You know, what's going on there? What's the difference? Can you tell us more about that?
Great question. So yeah, we basically have two types of fats. So one is the good fat and one is the bad fat. And what the bad fat does is it causes high cholesterol. So cholesterol is kind of like this waxy substance similar to earwax. It's in our blood. We need it. Some amount of it is good. But what happens is it's flowing through your veins, your arteries. It can start to stick, you know, and we know it starts to stick very early from before we're born. So that builds up over years. So our body produces a certain amount of this cholesterol based on how much of the bad fats we're eating. And the main sources of these kind of bad fats would be things like butter. Butter is definitely a big one. Red meats, they're quite fatty meats. You know, the skin on chicken, like rashers, sausages, cheese can be another big one. Some full fat dairy, and then your pastries, your takeaways, chocolate, all these nice things. Then the good fats would be fats that are liquid at room temperature. So if you think of your oily fish, your salmon, your sardines, your mackerel, oil, nuts, seeds, all these good fats are actually quite good for us. They help keep our blood nice and thin, a good heart rhythm, can have lower cholesterol. So we want to reduce the amount of the bad fats we're eating and have more of these good fats, which will be good for cholesterol and overall health.
Okay, so now we're talking to a farming community, and you're talking about bad fats, and you're mentioning dairy products, and you're mentioning meat, and you're mentioning chicken. So please tell me that we're not telling the farmers and the farming community, oh, you shouldn't be eating meat and you shouldn't be eating chicken, cut it all out.
No.
So how do we get the balance right here?
Exactly. So there's no foods that we need to cut out completely. With our red meat, we generally say 2-3 times a week. And it's more so avoiding the heavily processed ones. So the rashers, sausages, they can also be quite salty. With your chicken, you know, the chicken, turkey are quite lean meats. We say to go for the breast rather than the leg or the wing, you know, for most of the time. So they're not gone. Your full fat dairy, so, you know, they're fine. Your milk, your yogurt, very healthy, good sources of calcium, of protein. With cheese, that's when we say maybe limit to a couple of times a week, and the portion size of that. And the reason we kind of say limit cheese is more so for the salt. It can be quite high in salts, which will affect blood pressure, and can be quite high in calories. So that's one, you know, if you're watching your weight, and a portion size of cheese is generally about 2 tons, about 30 grams. So it's about in moderation. No foods are cut out. It's just about looking at how often we have them and to have more variety. So if you're eating red meat every day, maybe including some more chicken, maybe fish once a week if it's not something you have at the moment. So no foods cut out, just looking at a bit more variety.
Yeah, I think it's important. It's all about the balance. And I know that Austin comes from a farming background, and I'm proud to say I come from a farming background as well. And I know that when the dinner is served up in an Irish farmhouse, we're talking about a fairly big plate of food. Now, you mentioned portion size there. This is important. Tell us why it's important, and can you quantify it for us?
I can, and I have a little prop. This is
look what I prepared earlier. This is very good. Yeah, totally unrehearsed. So tell us, what is that lovely picture you're sharing with us?
This is our portion plate. So this would be kind of a recommendation for what your plate should ideally look like. And this is, you know, this might not suit everyone, but ideally you'll have a good half portion, half plate of vegetables. So again, high in vitamins, high in minerals, high in fiber, really, really good for us. Helps keep us feeling full.
If I can interrupt you, and just so we're all clear, what you're showing us is the standard sort of dinner plate that you'd find in a normal household, yeah. So we're all clear on that. So what you're trying to illustrate here is, if we were looking at our dinner plate, this is how it should look in terms of the distribution of vegetables, meat, and potato. Is that right?
Exactly. And one thing I will say about the plate is that it's a bit smaller than a typical plate. It's about 9 inches, so about an outstretched hand's width. So a lot of our plates are quite bigger than this. So if we were basing, the proportions off our bigger plates, there might be more food. So I would say, first of all, the smaller plate, and then the proportions. So it's half veg, a quarter your potato, whereas probably what most of us tend to do is these two are switched. So we have a good half plate of potato, a little bit of vegetables, and then maybe our meat. So the suggestion would be maybe to cut down the potato gradually and aim for more vegetables. So that's what it would look like, not going to happen, change overnight.
Hard sell, but I think it's an important message. Zoe, if I can jump back to you, Aisling mentioned blood pressure. And of course, we know that blood pressure, as we pointed out earlier on, is a risk factor for heart disease, but not only heart disease, but also stroke. So what is high blood pressure? And would I know if I had high blood pressure?
No. So blood pressure is known as the silent killer. And the reason for that is you don't get symptoms. Like, you will only know if your blood pressure is high and what your blood pressure is by physically getting it checked. So everyone ideally should have their blood pressure checked at least once a year. So with your GP, you can have, you can go to your pharmacy. There's loads of different ways to get your blood pressure checked, but you should be aiming to have it checked at least once a year. So what your blood pressure is, you may have noticed when you have it taken, is there's two numbers. So the top number is the systolic, and that is the force at which your heart is pumping the blood around, the pressure that it's pumped around. So that the top number, that your systolic, you should be aiming for it to be less than 140. If you've another condition, such as diabetes, or maybe you've previously had a stroke, or you have cardiovascular disease, you've had a heart attack, then that number should be less than 130. And then the bottom number, so the diastolic, that is the resting phase of the blood pressure. So when your heart's resting between contractions. And again, that number should be less than 90 generally. And if you have another kind of chronic condition, it should be less than 80. And again, these are not like the speed limit. You shouldn't be aiming for those as being the top end. Lower is better with blood pressure. So, we'd look to kind of ideally less than 140 over 90 or 130 over 80.
Now, I think that's a very important message, because I think most of us are actually not aware of these numbers, and these are very important numbers. So even if it was a sort of a take-home message on blood pressure, just remind us again, with the exception of people who might have an already, medical history, the average person's blood pressure should be, what the high number should be, did you say 140?
Yeah.
140?
Over 90.
Over 90. So
yeah.
If you're above 140 on the high number and below 90, this is something that needs to be looked at, yeah? And of course, we know now that you're saying that people should get their blood pressure checked at least once a year. And we also know that actually there are very good and reliable blood pressure monitors available now. Any thoughts on using those, or what ones we should use or shouldn't use, and the value of that?
Yeah, so ideally it should be one that's recommended by the British and Irish Hypertension Society, because we know that they're to a high standard and they're accurate. And you should also ensure that when you put the cuff on, that it's on correctly. We have a video of how to accurately check your blood pressure on the Croí website, actually, which can be really useful, because it's surprising how many people come to do it and they'll have the cuff on upside down, or it's too low. And this can actually give you falsely high readings, which no one wants. But once you get into the habit of doing it, it's quite easy, and it's quite good to check your blood pressure now and again, and be aware of what your numbers are, because that's the main thing, is knowing what your numbers are and what that means if they're high. Because I think sometimes as healthcare professionals, we can fall into a bad habit of saying, oh, it's grand. Well, actually, we should be saying, no, that's high. And as a patient, we need to kind of give you that information so that, you know, you feel empowered. Say, well, look, you said it was a bit high the last time I had it checked, and it's still a bit high this time. So, you know, what can we do to address that problem?
Okay. Good information there. And again, I think this concept of know your numbers, and we might come back to that again before the discussion ends. Jenni and indeed Austin, I'll direct it to Jenni, and Austin, feel free to interject. We talk about physical activity and we talk about exercise. Are we talking about the same thing, or are they two different things? And what's the significance of either or both?
They are two different things, but they're related. Physical activity is essentially any movement. So the fact that I might even be sitting here swaying a little bit, or just, you know, shifting my body weight around, that is physical activity. Exercise is when you're moving for a reason to get healthier. So it's about, you're either doing it to be stronger in your muscles, so that you can lift better, or, you know, this fits with farming as well. It's very important. You've got to have strong musculature. You know, you're going to do these tasks. It's also about the type of exercise that actually lowers your blood pressure, and all the things we're talking about, the type of exercise that improves your cholesterol levels. So we know that actually exercise is very powerful. So it's doing it the right way. And that's where, when you fill in your survey, and if you're interested in the Croí program, and maybe you have high blood pressure, or you have high cholesterol, you have some of these issues, you can spend time with the exercise specialist, actually really making sure that, you know, in your day-to-day life, we can make the most of the activity. Because as farmers, there is activity in the everyday, but it's not the same as previously. There's a lot more tractors, you know, looking at, you know, combines, loaders, and so on. So it isn't the same load as it used to be. And if you're active and moving around, that's good, but it isn't the type of activity that actually gives you those heart health benefits. The type of activity that gives you heart health benefits is the sort where you get your breathing going a bit, you actually challenge the body a little bit. And it's something we call overload. So in order to make these benefits, you have to stimulate the body just a little bit more than what you're accustomed to. So I'm not suggesting you go completely the other way, but it's just that little bit of stimulus, and that's what then causes the blood pressure to go down, causes the cholesterol to improve. So you can beat a lot of these risk factors by being active, but choosing activities that give you the most benefit. And you can do that in a farm on every day by moving, perhaps when you're walking, getting that pace up a little bit. Yeah, so building it into what you're doing at the moment, but just maximizing the opportunities.
Okay, so Austin, you know what it's like to live and work on a farm, and you have a special experience in high performance. What sort of tips would you give to farmers listening to us in terms of how they do what Jenni suggests in their everyday farming life?
Yeah, it all comes back, and it's a really interesting concept, because the viewpoint out there will be obviously that farmers are fit because of the activity, and has been explained. When you look at the body in terms of it constantly needs a new stressor in order for it to grow and become stronger. And if we give the same level of activity to the body every day, it's no longer overloading, it's no longer progressing. So it comes back to, really, in terms of when you talk about exercise, you really talk about what we call FITT, the frequency, the intensity, the time, and the type. So them are the four key variables that you can manipulate any day. So the frequency of your movement, can you bring it up? Can you elevate the pace of your movement? The time that you spend moving, can you extend that? So if you're only moving for an hour a day, can you extend that to 2 hours? The type of movement, can it be a gentle jog? Can it be a brisk walk? Can it be a little bit of strength work that you can incorporate in a little bit more on the farm? So the frequency, the intensity, the time, and the type. These are all the key variables. So if we can manipulate them and stretch them daily, it means it's overloading our cardiovascular system, it's overloading our skeletal muscular system, and our body needs a new stressor for it to rebound, and what we call super compensation, so it gets stronger and so on. So it's about looking at your environment and being really crafty and finding ways to build in extra challenges around the movement and around your numbers, and to try and elevate that. And with, like, from a farming perspective, there's loads of opportunities because we've got loads of wide open spaces. A lot of our rural land runs out to maybe the sea or so on. So we've the opportunity to get to a beach or so on. But to know your numbers, and I think the big thing for me coming back to it is, you know, to have a little plan for yourself over the week in terms of what your movement is going to look like outside maybe just your farming, that maybe that you've blocked off, like on a Monday or a Wednesday and a Saturday, that those are key days that you know you're going to elevate your movement, elevate your heart rate a little bit more, so you can get those benefits. Because as we've said at the outset, farming is becoming a lot more sedentary. The impact of technology, it's robbing us of those opportunities to move and overload the body. So again, planning, be crafty, use your environment, think of those little variables of frequency, the intensity, the time, and the type.
So I'm going to come back to you in exactly a minute, because I'm going to ask Jenni one quick question, because I want to pick up on that planning piece. Jenni, you hear various numbers thrown out as to how much exercise we should take per day in terms of minutes and so forth. What is the official line on this, and what do we know from research?
So in terms of research, I think I'm going to start with what I think is a really important point. There is no lower limit to get some benefit. So even just increasing your activity now a little bit has a positive effect. And I think that's a really important message, because for many of us, you know, including my own experiences, we sometimes set ourselves a goal. We realize I need to be more active. I need to, you know, change my diet. And we sometimes make those extreme changes and don't build up slowly. And then it's very hard to keep it up. So making small changes firstly. So I'd say any increase firstly is beneficial. So that's the first step. What you want to do then is make sure that you're getting at least 150 minutes of this principle where you've got your breathing going a bit. You can speak a sentence, but it's a bit of a challenge. Yeah, you can notice your breathing's deeper and faster. It's got to be enough that you can feel what Austin was saying. You've got to feel that stressor, but it's comfortable. It's that balance, you know, between that sort of comfort stressor. And you want to get 150 minutes of that as a minimum. If you're trying to actually manage your weight, if you wanted to lose a few pounds here and there, we know that you need to probably do more in the range of 250 to 300 minutes over the week. So that's sort of two important messages. The first is anything is better than nothing, increasing it even a little bit.
Yeah.
Aim for these first targets. And then if you really want to go for the gold medal, so if you want gold, you want to then have 3 times a week where it's really, you're dedicated to it. So it's that walk down to the beach or whatever, and you're doing it for your fitness and your health.
Yeah.
And all about your fitness and your health. And if you do 3 times of really structured, dedicated activity that's structured really well, you'll get the gold medal. You win the prize for.
Okay, very good. And that brings me back very nicely to where I wanted to go with Austin, because he talked about planning. And I know that planning and goal setting, Austin, are very much part of your world in terms of how you advise people. Now, taking what Jenni has just said and put yourself back in the farm scenario, you know, where you know what the farm day is like. Can you advise us on how to plan and goal set and achieve what Jenni has just suggested?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The first thing is to set a little bit of time aside. And I know time it's a precious commodity in today's world, but you can, you know, the way I would do it in terms on a farm is I would set a little goal on a Sunday night for the week coming, in terms of look at the structure of the morphology of your week, Monday through to Sunday, and to pick out maybe 3 days in that week where you're going to elevate your movement pattern. And that's very, very simple. Again, I'm a big believer in your little pen and paper, and peg it up even on the door of the fridge, and mark out the 3 days and the 3 types of activities that you're going to do on that day. It can be as simple and as profound as that, to block out those. And the reason we use planning is because it gives us an idea in terms of a measurement, that we can actually measure what we're doing. So if we're not measuring what we're doing, we'll never know the end product and the end result. So it's like it's about keeping ourselves on track. You know, there's that old adage again that, you know, the arrow doesn't seek the target draws in the arrow. So once you have a target, it pulls you towards it. So you know you have 3 days where I have 3 blocks of exercises to do, and that kind of pulls you in, and you go for that. What does that do? It also builds up, you know, in terms of confidence and your self-efficacy about yourself, that you're actually on top of your brief, that you're actually bringing more control to your day. And that again goes back to your heart health in terms of maybe reducing the anxiety level. I know the lifestyle on a farm, it's 24/7. It's you know, you're going hammer and tongs, and sometimes it's very, very hard. You know, the day takes over and you lose those pockets of space where you could. But if you have a plan that's measurable, you can keep yourself accountable to it. And maybe it's a spouse or a partner knows that them are your 3 days, and they can give you a little prompt and say, Jimmy or Mary, did you get out? Did you do that today? No, I'm on it. Thanks for the reminder, and so on. But we need a little plan. What it gives us too is it gives us that little bit of motivation. And that builds into confidence. I always say these things are like little flywheels. They're momentum gatherers, because each time you do them, you get a little bit more. And then maybe you have the exercise bit done, and you think about, well, there's maybe 3 days that I could tidy up my nutrition now, you know, and all of a sudden you're gaining momentum the whole time. And it's not you know, huge arduous task. Small quick wins, small things done repeatedly are the big wins in life.
Yeah, now you created a great image there with the arrow and the target. Just say that again now.
Yeah, so the target draws in the arrow. The arrow doesn't seek the target.
Yeah,
so if you set the target,
exactly,
you know, that's where you move to.
Yeah, I think that's great. And if we can go away with that image in our head, and the idea of, it sounds so simple, we don't do it. And I know from personal experience where I have done it, it actually works. And that is where you block out time and you say, no matter how busy things are, and things are hectic, as you say, on a farm, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you block out time and say, I'm going to do this 3 times a week, this is your arrow again, it will suck you in, and you'll get to
that idea of prioritizing. I see it with even, you know, the busiest of executives across corporate. Just when you look at diaries, you know, they're sacrosanct. You got to block out those hours, and they're untouchables. Nothing. No, this is my time. And that's your investment in yourself, and that's you self-regulating, as I said at the outset there.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm just looking at our time here, and I have to say, I personally have found this a very interesting conversation, and lots of great information here. But as you've been speaking, my screen is just clocking up here with questions. So given that we have about 30 minutes left or so, why don't we shift now to questions and answers, so to speak, and I'm going to take them literally as they're appearing in front of me. So we could be jumping from diet to exercise to drugs to whatever. We might even have sex again, depending on how things go. So I'm going to start as they come in and see where we go. First question: I walk every day on the farm. How can I make it more beneficial for my health? Now, maybe I throw that to you, Jenni. And again, if any of my panel want to, add in, just raise your hand and I'll come to you. So, walking every day on the farm.
Yeah. Well,
is it
first
beneficial?
of all,
I think
that's
you've answered
fantastic.
that. Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing: is all activity is good, but to make that activity the most beneficial for all the things we've talked about, we come back to getting that intensity right. So as Austin was saying, it's that frequency, intensity, and type. And walking is fantastic. It's aerobic. It's just the right thing for the blood pressure lowering and all these really good heart health benefits. But that intensity matters. So it's got to feel like it challenges your breathing a little bit, but you can still speak that sentence. I think that's the key. You can still hold a conversation, but it's a challenge. You should feel it in your leg muscles. You should be warm. You should get a sense of warmth. Your breathing is deeper and faster. So walking is good, but just walking by itself isn't optimal. You've got to get the intensity of that walk and make the most of that walk. Okay,
very good. Zoe, remind us of those blood pressure numbers again. What did you say they were? 140 over?
90.
140 over 90 is what we're looking for. So
no, less than 140
less
over 90.
than 140 over 90.
Less than 140 over 90.
And so there's a question in: is it dangerous if my blood pressure fluctuates from time to time? And the example that's been given is 150 over 90 dropping to 120 over 80.
Okay, so blood pressure, like you could do your blood pressure once and then do it again like a minute later. They're going to be different because like a heartbeat in it, it will change. Like you won't consistently get the same number. You know, there's certain things like doing the exercise, getting your heart rate up and really pushing yourself with exercise. It will increase your blood pressure. That's okay. That's normal. And the fact that it's coming down to the 120, was it 120/80?
It says 120/80, yeah.
Yeah, that is a very good blood pressure. That's kind of, like Jenny said, that's the gold medal, that's the gold star. If everyone had a 120/80 blood pressure, we'd be very happy. So, it's how often it's high, above the 140/90, and what you're doing that causes it. If it's not that often and generally it's low, then that's fine. But it's looking at the whole picture.
Okay, so whoever asked that question, whatever you're doing well, and keep it up. And I'm going to stay on with you, Zoe, because this is in from a female questioner, and her mother, aunt, plural, I'm not sure how many, and uncle have all passed away under the age of 60 with heart attacks. So our first question is, do I need to get my heart checked?
Okay, so that's significant. That's a history, and there is the risk there. But, and it's great that that person's acknowledging that. So the first thing I would say is, now it's difficult with COVID, but, get your bloods taken, find out, again, know your numbers, what's your cholesterol. Aisling said there, if that's high, particularly, we'd be looking at the LDL. So if you remember, L for lousy, and we want it low, that's the bad cholesterol. So lower is better. So get your bloods taken, know what the cholesterol is, and the LDL. Have your blood pressure checked. They'd be the two main things. And then it'd be was it heart attacks that you said that they've had?
Yeah, and actually, based on what you've just said, what I'm thinking is, and this is a plug for a project we've launched ourselves in response to COVID. And I'm speaking on behalf of Croí here, we found that when COVID hit, first of all, people felt at sea, couldn't make contact with their doctors, appointments cancelled and so forth. So we've launched a service called HeartLink West. And it's a straightforward phone number, 091544310. And at the end of that phone line, we have access to nurse specialists, dietetic specialists, exercise specialists. And why don't we say to this lady, you know what, why don't you give us a call and we'll give you very specific advice on what to do there. So I hope she's still listening. But what you're hearing there is from what you're getting from her question clearly is what you alluded to earlier, this idea of family history. It doesn't mean it's fatal, but it means that you need to be more aware and maybe take extra action in terms of your heart health. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. This is from somebody who lives on their own, and as such, obviously loneliness and long nights in winter and so forth, and they tend to hit the junk food. So this is, I'll put to you, Aisling, helpful hints here. I mean, it is a real situation. You're sitting on your own, and it's easier, isn't it, to dial in or go out and get the takeaway?
Yeah, and it's a really common issue. It's always been an issue, but even more so with COVID. So one of the best tips that seems to work for people is to keep something that I call a food and mood diary. And by that, I mean, I always say write down what you eat during the day, but also write down how you're feeling, because a lot of our eating and what we choose to eat is linked to how we feel. So it can be that we're having a good day and we're staying on track. And then it can be maybe it's a stressful day, something's happened at work, we've had a fight with someone, and we might turn to food as a comfort. Because when we do eat these foods, especially the typical comfort foods, the high sugar, the bread, the jam, the crisps, the biscuits, they release dopamine from our brain, which is a feel-good hormone. So it does make us feel good. It makes us feel kind of warm, So that's the first thing I say is look at why you're eating. Is it boredom? Is it loneliness? Do you need to, maybe find something else to do in the evenings? Is it a different hobby? Is that when you get out for your walk? Is that when you call a family member? Maybe change the structure of your evenings. Another thing I say is maybe to look at what you're eating during the day. So are you eating enough? Are you genuinely hungry in the evening, or is it that kind of emotional hunger is what I call it? So it's really important to identify that. And then maybe if you're just in the habit of snacking, it can be switched into a healthier snack. So maybe it's yogurt and fruit or something like that instead of biscuits. But that's a really difficult one because the eating is linked to more of the psychology than the actual hunger. Okay,
a related question on the diet side, and it's to do with salt. As we all know, salt has a huge impact on blood pressure in particular. But this question is more about, how much salt, they're clearly in the habit of adding salt to their dinner every evening. Like how much salt is acceptable, and what are your tips on the use of salt?
So in general, 5 grams of salt a day is all we need, and that's about a teaspoon. But 80% of the salt that we eat, so about 4 grams, is already in the food that we eat. So it's pretty much added to everything that's in any way processed. So any salt that we add on extra is probably going to push us over that 5 grams. So ideally, we shouldn't really be adding any extra salt at the table. But I know it's a very common thing to maybe have the salt shaker and instinctively add the salt before you've even tasted the food. So if you're cutting down salt, you need to maybe use other flavorings. So your pepper, your herbs, your spices, but also know that it takes about 6 weeks for your taste buds to adapt to having less salt. So if you're gradually cutting down, if you, in 6 weeks time, go back to eating what you were having today, it's going to taste really salty. So, basically there's all the salt we need is in our food. So, start cutting down any extra you add, use your herbs and spices, and know that it will take time, but yeah.
So you were saying there about the basic amount of salt we require is how many? What
5 grams.
5 grams. Quantify that. Like, is that a teaspoon, tablespoon, bucketful?
1
teaspoon.
Mm-hmm.
So a teaspoon of salt in the entire day is as much as our body requires.
Yeah, and if you look at some foods, like a bag of crisps could have 1 gram of salt. 5 digestive biscuits has 1 gram of salt. A slice of cheese can have 0.5 gram of salt. So, a packet of soup, if it's the powdered soup, can sometimes have nearly 2 grams. So between your packet of crisps, your biscuits, your cheese, and your soup, you could have that 5 grams in the day. And that's before you've added any to your cooking, you've had your dinner. So that's what I mean about it being hidden in foods. Yeah. And like, the fried foods, the rashers, the sausages, the ham, the cheese, that's where it's really hidden.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sorry,
Zoe. Yeah.
It's not just, there's no such thing as low salt either, or garlic salt. If it says salt in the name, it's salt. They all do the same. So, just so people are aware of that.
But again, creating a picture in people's mind, a tablespoon of salt is a very small amount of salt. So we really don't know, we're really not aware of how much extra salt. Next question is really up your alley, Austin. And it says, I would like to know where one can find time to exercise, as I farm, work part-time, and any free time I have, I give to helping my neighbors. There's just not enough hours in the day. Now that is typical, isn't it, of what a lot of people feel, and it's their reality.
Absolutely.
So how going back to your planning and goal setting?
Yeah.
How do you give this person advice?
A shot in the arm. Well, the question I always ask people is, and the first thing you need to understand is, and you probably need to turn the lens inwards a little bit and ask yourself, what is the value and the importance you put on your health? Where does it stand currently in the greater scheme of your life? Is it number 1, 2, 3, or 4? Generally, when you ask that question of people, it's placed in a 3 or 4. They say it's my family, my job, my hobby, my health. But if you can't serve from an empty vessel, so you have to prioritize. You have to prioritize your health and well-being. You simply have to make time. When you look at the environment that this particular person is executing across, when you get out in the evening to farm, I'm sure you can squeeze, and you don't have to designate or dedicate an hour, but is there 15 minutes that you can steal there around when you're farming to elevate your heart rate with some level of physical activity? Can you place that in? It doesn't, people get this concept or this idea that I must be in a gym, I must be lifting weights. You don't. Use your environment, be crafty. Can you rise 10 minutes earlier in the morning and get out of bed and maybe do 10 squats to elevate your heart rate or so on? A little bit of calisthenics to strength work. Can you, what I often say, what I call snack exercise, that you get bite size of exercise throughout the day, and it's a nice little one, particularly if your time is squeezed. But looking for those opportunities to move more. With a concept there, even, you know, with people that are working sedentary, like 93, every 90 minutes you move 3, you know, so you're looking just for opportunities to get more movement in during the day. We're all busy, but we have to prioritize and make it a priority. You get one heart, set of lungs, you know, one system. You've got to invest in it. It's that important.
Well, I think what's great here is you're reiterating Jenni's message that, you know, anything is better than nothing. And what you call it, snacksercise, was it? Small.
Yeah, snacksercise, that idea of like snacks of exercise, because some people, what puts most people off is they think it's the 60-minute bout or it's the gym or so on. But there's loads of ways to be crafty across your day to get those blocks of movement in that support you. And it's just about finding those little chunks to get in, and as we call them, little snacksercise. They can be a great way to support you.
Great answer to that question, because when I was looking at it, I was saying, you know, this is real life. This is this person's reality, and your point about, you know, taking out bite sizes, you know, doing it in small bits. But I think the most important thing you said there was what do you value most, you know? And so if we don't put our health, if we don't prioritize it,
your health and well-being is the foundational pillar of all performance and within your lifestyle. Everything sits on that. And you know, I know I've put a few quotes, Stephen, but there's one great one that I often heard, and it's like, your health is the crown that sits upon the well man's head, only visible by the ill. It's only till you lose your health and well-being will you truly appreciate it. So, you know, we don't have a natural circuit breaker as humans. We'll go 24/7, repeatedly the wheels will spin. But sometimes it's only illness that forces us to rip up the handbrake and stop and go, hold on, I need to look at things here. So prioritize.
Great message. Jenni, you were going to add to that.
I think it was just that, you know, the health is the most important asset in the farm itself. So it's investing in that as well. And I just wanted to reiterate earlier to remember the really big benefits in just reducing your sitting times. That's actually quite a simple thing to do. So practical tips: if you're taking a phone call on a mobile phone, you know, do it standing up, pace up and down instead of taking it seated. I've got a piano just next to me here where I've got a printer on the top, and then I put my laptop on top of that so I can do a little bit of the paperwork side or the admin side, standing up now and again. And, you know, I suppose something that I found really amazing is that if you stand for about 3 hours more a day than perhaps before, so you've reduced your sitting time overall by about 3 hours, bearing in mind that survey found more than 8 hours, didn't it, in farmers, the current survey that was published. But imagine if you just took that down by 3 hours and you kept that up, the data shows you burn about 10 marathons worth over a year in energy expenditure. You run 10 marathons worth just by standing up more. So,
I think this is another very important take-home message from this evening's conversation about exercise and fitness. What you've just said there, standing, the actual act of standing, can have that benefit. Say it again, the benefit of it.
So a colleague of mine who's done a lot of science in this area has highlighted that standing, they did it in estate agents who were spending a lot of time in seated office work. They got them to stand up and down regularly, but they stood 3 hours more than they did previously. And they measured how much extra energy, if you like, how many more calories they burnt. And it was the equivalent of 10 marathons worth of energy. So they had run the equivalent of 10 marathons simply in the office, standing up to do bits of their work, taking calls on their phone, standing up.
So less sitting, standing, any exercise, small snacksercises, massive benefits. Excellent messaging. there's so many questions coming in. I think what I should say is just remind people again of a service that Croí launched earlier this year, initially in response to COVID, but it's now, I think, a mainstream part of what we do. And we call it HeartLink West. And basically, this is a telephone call away from you. It's a local number 091 544 310. And normal working hours, Monday to Friday, call that number with any of your health queries, and we will direct you to a nurse, dietitian, or signpost you to whoever we deem is best to help with you. And because I'm mentioning this in light of so many of the sort of personal medical questions that are coming in. And I'd also mention, if I could, the Croí website, and Zoe made reference to it already, and it's simply croí.ie, and croí.ie/farmers leads you to lots of free resources on managing blood pressure, healthy living, exercise, online videos, and so forth. So do check that out, croí.ie, and also HeartLink West on 091 544 310. Next question, I'm going to go to you, Aisling, because we're back on the diet again here. And again, it's a very, common challenge, and I know that because this affects me. How do we keep away from the sweet dish after the dinner, and how do we fight the cravings for the sweeter things in life?
Yeah, again, really common question. So the first thing I would say is, again, like earlier, check if you're actually hungry, or if it's, maybe a habit, or maybe an emotional hunger. So it's in response to stress or boredom, and you're eating food to make you feel better. What I would say, if it's, you're craving that sweet thing after dinner, maybe substitute it for something sweet, but that's still healthy. So, the one that works for a lot of people would be maybe some natural yogurt, some chopped fruit salad, if you want it sweeter at the start, maybe a bit of honey. So you're getting that healthy sweet thing after dinner. Sometimes then it can be later into the evening where you're craving things because you're bored, or it's just a habit of sitting down with a cup of tea, a few biscuits, watching TV. And that's a really common one. And that can just be habit. So again, it could be substituting with something healthier, or, reducing it down. If you're having 4 biscuits, every evening, why not cut it down to 2? And over the week, you're going to be 14 biscuits a week. Over the year, that's all going to add up. So again, it's those small little changes. Maybe you're having, a large chocolate bar every evening. Maybe it's the large size one. Why don't you go down to an individual size one? Again, you're making that big change. And for you, that's going to be quite significant when it adds up over the week and the month and the year.
Yeah, and it's again back to Austin's arrow and the target piece. Set yourself small targets, and you'll see the difference. Here's an interesting one: cornflakes, Weetabix, or porridge?
Good question.
Which, any, all, or none are good for the heart?
So in terms of heart health, porridge is going to be probably one of the best ones, because with porridge, you've got something in it called beta-glucan. So, when you make porridge, it goes kind of gloopy. When that gets into your gut, it can help, by how it works, it can help lower your cholesterol. So porridge is very good if you have high cholesterol. Weetabix is a great one because it's high in fiber. So fiber is really important for keeping us feeling full. If you have any issues with constipation, fiber is a great one. Cornflakes will probably be the least beneficial of the 3. It would be low in fiber. It doesn't have that, the fiber that the porridge and the Weetabix would have. So that would be the lowest of the 3, but Weetabix, porridge, the 2 best ones.
So rank order: porridge, Weetabix, cornflakes.
Yeah.
Okay. A medical technical question somewhat for you, Zoe. Is it true that you should take aspirin if you feel you're suffering a heart attack? And if so, type of aspirin and dosage.
Okay, so yeah, if you're waiting on an ambulance and you think you're having a heart attack, because there's no reason for you not to take it, like you're allergic, then you can take aspirin, 300 milligrams normally. So that's usually you buy aspirin in 75 milligrams. So just be aware of the box. So you need 4 4 tablets if it's a 75 or a 300 milligram tablet, and you should chew it. So don't get the one that's enteric coated or got special coating on it to protect the stomach.
Okay.
Get the one that you can.
Yeah, sorry if I'm going to cross you. Given the fact that now we've been asked a very specific question about heart attack, I think we shouldn't miss the opportunity to, first of all, in case people go off chewing off a box of aspirin for the wrong reason, what are the classic symptoms of heart attack, and maybe not the not so common? So we know what we're talking about, first of all.
Yeah, so heart attack can be quite individual, actually. Generally, the classic symptoms would be a crushing central chest pain. You may feel sweaty, feel weak, be breathless, can feel sick. Some people can have a pain going sort of in the neck, can be shoulder pain. You may get all of these, you may get none. It can be, if you've diabetes, you might just get a bit of an indigestion or a heaviness, some people would describe it as, in the chest, but you wouldn't necessarily think it was a heart attack straight away. Women as well, in particular, they don't get typical symptoms usually. So it's important to be aware of that. Often women will present late if they're having a heart attack to the hospital, because they'll have been sent to maybe gynae or to gastro because they think it's a stomach or a different issue, rather than it being central, because they don't get the typical central chest pain. And also they'll tend to put the symptoms off and ignore them and think, oh, it'll go away, I'll take an antacid, But what I would say is, if something doesn't feel right and you're not, you don't know what it is, you need to get it checked, and the only way to get it checked is going to the hospital. So even in current situations, it's really important that you act on these symptoms, because the time is the most crucial thing. If it's a heart attack, the sooner you get treated, the more beneficial it is, because you get your heart revascularized quicker.
Yeah, and I think that is an opportunity for me to give a plug to a campaign that we have run earlier in the year, and we will be launching again, and it's the Just Go campaign. And the message is very simple. If you're experiencing what you've described as a typical symptoms of heart attack, you are experiencing a medical emergency. And despite all the messages about COVID and so forth, and I know hospitals are under enormous strain and pressure, you should still go and seek medical attention, because your chances of dying from a heart attack are far greater than dying from COVID. I think that's a very important message, because we saw in the early stages of COVID, the number of people experiencing heart attacks who didn't take action was quite alarming, and the consequences were quite serious. The most serious, of course, being death, but also we know from speaking to doctors that many people several weeks after the heart attack then presented in a far worse situation. So again, if there's a take-home message from this evening, Zoe has indicated there some of the classic symptoms of heart attack. If you're experiencing a cardiac emergency, just go seek medical attention. Despite all the COVID issues and challenges, you need to put your heart health before your fear of COVID. I'm going to go to you, Austin, because the next question, let me find it here. Yes, again, it's more about, it's to do with we talked about the connection between heart and mind, and the importance of social connections, friendships, relationships. Talk to us a little bit about that, because obviously in the COVID scenario, we've had lots of people basically socially isolated, and they're finding this very difficult.
Yeah, no, it is, and particularly probably, in a farming context, in terms of there's been a lot of things stripped away from us. Simple things like getting to the mart, maybe that midweek card game, even mass on a Sunday morning, or those other social activities that are kind of interwoven into the farming landscape. So I think at the moment, again, it comes back to having a little strategy for yourself to remain socially connected. And it might be an exercise that people could do, is a little thing we often call like identity mapping, whereby you maybe go through your phone book and pick out your top 12 or 15 people that you want to remain connected to. These could be people from varying different backgrounds, maybe with different skill sets, or they could be all from the farming community or so on. Or perhaps it could be someone that you might have sold an animal to maybe 6, 8, 10 months ago, and you just want to rekindle that connection and get, but to formulate some little bit of a plan for you, because we know the value of great conversations, and you get from those great conversations, you get that, what we call like that sort of spiritual transfer of energy between people. And there's very seldom things in life, from the existential things, that can really give us a lift and really raise our spirits than a really positive conversation or an uplifting conversation with someone. So the first and foremost thing I would say is make a little plan for yourself. Look through your phone book, and circle, maybe, as I said, a number of people that you want to reach out to. And don't be afraid. Most people are in the same predicament at the moment. There's a lot of people living on their own. There's a lot of people not having any social interactions. So have the courage to reach out and generate those positive conversations. And we know the farming community, we're great storytellers. We're great in terms of generating conversations out of thin air. If it's only around the weather, so be it. But again, what I would say to you in those conversations is, make sure they're positive, that they're about maybe ideas and concepts as opposed to about maybe people or so on. That you come off the phone and you feel that you've got a lift. And as I've said, great conversations bring great energy, and they really bring an awful lot to our lives. So to really plan those out for yourself across the week.
Yeah, and I have to say, there really are a huge amount of questions coming in, and there's one sort of underlying theme to a lot of these, and it's around the mental health piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the questions like, feeling depressed, anxious, lonely. And one person says, I find there's a huge stigma attached to saying, I don't feel well, I need help. Is it changing, or is this still the case? Are we in a better place now? And I know Zoe might want to add to this, or any of the panel, because this is a predominant theme through all the questions. This thing about, and I suppose it possibly is to do with what we're going through at the moment: the isolation, the loneliness, the fear of COVID, and the stigma attached to potentially realizing, God, I am actually depressed.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little better. We're certainly not where we need to be with regard to mental health. And, we just need so many more conversations around that. But we need better leadership on it as well. We need people to really grasp the nittle about it. I'm often looking at the culture of a house, the head of the home, to be having these conversations, to bringing this stuff out into the ether, asking your son or daughter, how are you feeling today? Asking your partner, how are you feeling today? Give somebody the opportunity to offload or unload. Or I often say, let those emotional walls fall. Let people, give them the opportunity, because everybody is struggling. Everybody has a lot going on, but to really reach out to people and to be very, very aware. And I suppose and maybe females have this a lot better than males in terms of they've great emotional and empathy and that ability to sense things a little bit quicker maybe than ourselves. So from that perspective, I just think internally in the house, your situational sensing, looking at people in terms of how are people feeling, and don't be afraid to reach out. It's such a sign of courage and strength, and to do that. And you get a lot from it yourself as well.
Yeah, I think again, a take-home message: if you're feeling low, if you have a low mood, or you're feeling anxious or depressed, actually admitting it, seeking help is a strength, not a weakness. Seeking help is a strength, not a weakness. I think that's a very important message. Zoe, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so definitely opening up, talking about it is really important. I think the first thing is acknowledging that you're struggling. That's a big thing. If you feel you're having more days that are bad than good, you shouldn't be feeling like that. And particularly in the current situation, it is difficult. Times are hard, but kind of speak to people. If there's someone you can confide in, brilliant. But also that stigma is changing it. I can't say it's gone, because it is maybe there a little in the community still. And as Austin said, men are maybe worse for it than women, like not talking about their feelings and kind of if something's bothering them. But in the healthcare profession, it's not, if you're not feeling well and you're feeling down, it's affecting your mood, it's affecting, because that'll impact on everything impacts on your physical health. You won't sleep. It gives you increased risk of heart disease. You know, it needs to be addressed. It needs to be sorted. So speak to a professional. You know, they won't turn you away. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll be put on a tablet. You know, there's lots of different options. There's counselling, there's CBT, you know, as well as medication. But there is something there. But you know, go to your GP. They you know, they can help you with that problem.
I think you've given very good messaging there, Zoe. One, I think it is that you shouldn't feel that way. In other words, there is a way out of this, a positive way out of this. You should open up and talk, as Austin has mentioned. You should speak to your healthcare professional, doctor, nurse, whoever, and you shouldn't be afraid to speak to them, because there's nothing you're going to say to them that they probably haven't heard before. No matter how embarrassing it is for you or how painful it is for you, there's nothing they haven't heard before. So I think that's a very important message. And there's a note just in actually from Enda Gagan, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly, Enda, from Teagasc. And he says that Teagasc are holding discussion groups via conference calls, and we're finding it's really engaging. We're finding that people are really engaging with these, and that these calls are really welcomed by the farming community. So again, Teagasc are offering this service. You all know how to reach Teagasc, so do that. And equally, again, I'd mention the HeartLink West service that Croí has. Again, we can signpost you, we can provide some of this information. You can contact us on 091 544 310, or we have an email address. I think you know it, Zoe, is it healthteam@croí.ie?
Yeah.
Healthteam@croí.ie. I am looking at the clock, and we have 1 minute to go. And before I do the sort of formal wrap up, I just want to check with my colleague, Annie. You should have done, we do, good girl, just spot on time. So I'm pleased to announce, and I hope he's still on the line, that the winner of our special Croí Mayo jersey is actually James McHale. So congratulations, James. And as we close down this evening's webinar, if you stay on the line, in other words, last person standing, we'll take your details and we'll ensure that you get this. Can I say, at a personal level, I have really enjoyed this conversation. There's been a huge amount of information, great practical tips. We've had a fantastic audience. They've stayed with us from the very beginning, and I know it's been a long session. I want to really thank all of those, first of all, who made this possible. I mentioned at the outset our partners in this, Healthy Ireland, and that's really through the offices of Lauren Scahan in HSE West, Teagasc and Pobble. And I want to thank Intersport Elvery's once more for the jersey, Mayo County Council for their collaboration with Croí on the Third Age programme. And I have to make a special mention to my colleagues in the background. That's Annie Costello, Bridget Cheesty, Adele Keneally, and Jackie O'Pie, who have been very supportive in putting this evening together. But of course, we couldn't do this without our panelists. And Austin, as I said at the outset, everybody else has a long-standing connection with us. I hope this is the start of a strong connection with you. You spoke some really great words of wisdom this evening. It was fantastic to have you with us. Thank you so much. To my colleagues, Jenni, Zoe, Aisling, thank you. I know it's after hours, and you've already had a long day, and I really appreciate you being part of this conversation. I want to just re-emphasize, and I think, seeing as we ended this evening's conversation on the issue of mental health, I want to re-emphasize the fact that, you know, this is a difficult time. It's a difficult time, particularly for the farming community. There is plenty of opportunities to reach out. Yes, it's painful. Yes, there are things that are troubling people, and sometimes they feel the stigma has been mentioned, or that they feel that there isn't anyone there. As Zoe made the point that healthcare professionals are there and there's nothing you can say to them that they haven't heard before. So pick up the phone. We know that Teagasc are offering those opportunities. Reach and contact your Teagasc office. And I made reference to our own Croí HeartLink West service. It's a telephone number 091 544 310. And you call us during normal office hours, and particularly with matters relating to cardiovascular health, but also mental health. And we have a team of specialists there to support you. We're slightly over on time. I'm going to say thank you to all my panelists. Thank you to so many of you who stayed with us throughout this evening. I hope it was a benefit. There are lots of take-home tips, and perhaps we'll do this again in the future. Take care, and thank you.
Take care.